Communication is also used to coordinate foraging, which is an imperative part of species survival. Cliff swallows actually live in big colonies of nests called information centers. They're called information centers because of the communication that takes place there. They bring in other birds and recruit them to forage in groups because that's their safety in numbers. And they do this with communication called squeak calls. They make these squeak calls only when there's a new food source that's found. And those squeak calls are only used for that reason. And so this is a very specific type of communication in cliff swallows. The signalers benefit because the extra recruits help with tracking, and they're all more likely to receive more benefits of foraging whenever they work together. And signalers also benefit because of the safety in numbers. The responders of the squeak calls benefit because of their enhanced access to food. As another example of communication for coordinated foraging, juvenile ravens yell when they locate a food patch. They yell out to other ravens. It helps to displace adult guards of those locations. But groups of ravens in general will get together at night and take over trees, and they create information centers where they communicate using various and sundry calls, and they transmit information about food sources. When dawn comes and they all leave out to go to various and sundry food sources, they don't split up and go different directions. They all move together. And so there is some degree of communication that's taking place in these animals about which food sources that they're going to be moving to every day. Honeybees are another example of using communication for foraging, and you'll notice that in the videos in the weekly folder, there's a video of the honeybee waggle dance. The waggle dance is depicted in the bottom right corner, just in case you want to do the waggle at home and impress your friends on Friday night, for example. But honeybees actually use this dance to confer information about their foraging expeditions. We've discussed previously in the semester the genetic underpinnings of what happens when bees and wasps reach a certain age and they express a hormone that initiates them leaving the hive to go out and do foraging. And when they go out and do this foraging, they get all this information about patches. They come back to the hive and they communicate with other foragers about where those patches are. And those foragers can get information about the distance to the patch, the direction, and the odor of the flowers, which gives important information about the viability of that area as a food source. And in the waggle dance, the length of the dance communicates the source distance. So length in the waggle dance is actually that straight part of the oval that you're looking at. And so it's actually really miraculous that they can communicate with one another. But what they can't communicate, interestingly, is distance up and down. So if a bee is able to find some food that's up kind of high, and then they come back, they do the waggle dance, any other foragers that go out to that area will stay low and be looking for the source. So there's no way in the waggle dance to communicate up, which I thought was really interesting. All of these transitions in the dance are regulated by a single gene. So there's no pleiotropic stuff going on here. And there are chemical cues that elicit these types of responses. Additionally, temperature during development can influence the dance. And we've discussed this before with wasps and their temperature during development for parasitic wasps. And so similarly, the temperature during development will actually change their behavior. Those that are raised in higher temperatures, like around 36 degrees Celsius, do better than those who are raised in lower temperature. They're not as good as communicating. They're not as good at communicating. Another example of animal communication for foraging is the leafcutter ant. And you may remember in one of my previous videos that I found some leafcutter ants in Panama, And I've got a picture of them and a video of them. And what you may remember is that they actually created trails. They created paths where they wore out the grass because they were moving so much, and they were cutting down leaves and carrying them on their back, sometimes up to 20 times their own body weight. And you also know from a previous lecture that they forage on fungus, which they cultivate on plants. They do this in two ways. One form of communication for these pathways is leaving a scent behind. They use chemicals and they follow these chemical trails. Another way that they do it is shake their abdomen, called a gaster, which is pictured in the bottom right corner of this slide. And those stridulations create vibrations that allow them to communicate with one another about which leaves are the most tender. And those are the quality leaves that they're looking for. And so they're able to communicate in that way as well.